In 2008, California promised America something it had never seen before: a true high-speed rail system connecting Los Angeles and San Francisco in under 3 hours. Trains moving at over 200 miles per hour. A modern transportation network designed to compete with highways, reduce flights, cut emissions, and completely reshape how people move across the state. The projected cost, $33 billion. The planned opening date, 2020. Today, nearly 2 decades later, there are still no high-speed trains carrying passengers anywhere in California. The projected cost has exploded past $100 billion. Political battles have consumed the project for years. Entire sections have been delayed, scaled back, or left without funding. And instead of connecting Los Angeles to San Francisco, the first operational segment is now expected to run between Bakersfield and Merced. Meanwhile, during that same period, countries around the world moved ahead anyway. China built the largest high-speed rail network on Earth. Morocco launched Africa's first bullet train. Even countries with far fewer resources than the United States are now operating modern rail systems America still hasn't managed to build. And that's why the story has become bigger than just a train project, because at this point, California high-speed rail has become a symbol of something much larger. The growing question of whether the United States can still build massive infrastructure projects the way it once did. So, what exactly happened here? How did one of the most ambitious transportation projects in American history spiral into decades of delays, cost overruns, and political warfare? And is this project still the future of American transportation, or a warning about the future of American infrastructure itself? Today we're breaking down the rise, the collapse, and the uncertain future of America's high-speed rail dream. And if you enjoy deep dives into the infrastructure shaping the future of cities, transportation, and the economy, make sure to subscribe. To understand why this project became so controversial, you first have to understand just how ambitious the original vision really was. Back in the early 2000s, California wasn't just trying to build another rail line, it was trying to fundamentally change transportation in America. The proposal was simple in theory but massive in scale. A fully electrified high-speed rail system stretching roughly 500 miles across the state, eventually connecting major cities from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim. Trains would travel at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, cutting travel time between Northern and Southern California to under 3 hours. It was supposed to be a massive overhaul for the state. California's highways were overcrowded, airports were reaching capacity, population growth was putting increasing pressure on transportation infrastructure. Supporters argued that high-speed rail could become a cleaner, faster, and more efficient alternative to both driving and flying. But this wasn't just about transportation. Supporters promised economic growth, job creation, and a modern infrastructure system capable of competing with Europe and Asia. Thousands of construction jobs would be created during development, followed by long-term employment in operations, maintenance, engineering, and transit services once the system was complete. And globally, the timing made sense. Japan's bullet trains had already been operating for decades. France, Germany, and Spain were rapidly expanding their own high-speed networks. China was beginning what would eventually become the largest rail expansion project in modern history. Meanwhile, the United States, the country that once pioneered the transcontinental railroad, had fallen behind. So in 2008, California voters approved Proposition 1A, authorizing nearly $10 billion in bond funding for the project. At the time, the estimated total cost sat around $33 billion, with officials targeting an opening date of 2020. But almost immediately, the cracks started to show. So, what happened? Well, the biggest problem with California high-speed rail wasn't just construction. It was that the project moved forward before many of the hardest questions had actually been solved. On paper, the plan looked straightforward. In reality, building nearly 500 miles of high-speed rail across California meant navigating one of the most expensive, regulated, and politically complicated environments in the world. The first major issue was land. The rail line would run directly through California's Central Valley, crossing farmland, communities, and private property all across the state. That meant acquiring thousands of parcels of land before construction could even fully begin. And every delay added cost. Some landowners fought the project in court, others challenged route decisions or environmental reviews. In total, thousands of individual negotiations and legal disputes slowed progress for years. What initially looked like a transportation project quickly became a maze of lawsuits, permitting battles, and political negotiations. Then came the environmental review process. California has some of the strictest environmental regulations in the country. Every section of the route required extensive studies, approvals, revisions, and public challenges. Supporters argued those protections were necessary. Critics argued the process made large-scale infrastructure nearly impossible to build efficiently. And while all of this was happening, costs kept climbing. The original $33 billion estimate began to collapse under the reality of rising labor costs, inflation, design changes, and delays. By the mid-2010s, project costs had already ballooned dramatically. Today, estimates for the full San Francisco-Los Angeles system sit at roughly $125 billion or more. At the same time, the timeline completely unraveled. The original vision targeted completion by 2020, but as political pressure intensified and funding gaps widened, the state was forced to scale back its immediate ambitions. Instead of focusing on the full Los Angeles to San Francisco route, officials shifted toward completing an initial Central Valley segment first. And this is where the irony of the project really started to hit. What was originally pitched as a transformational system connecting two of America's largest cities became, at least temporarily, a line connecting Bakersfield and Merced, two Central Valley cities with a combined population far smaller than what voters originally imagined. Even California officials later admitted mistakes were made. Early projections had been overly optimistic, financing was never fully secured, and the complexity of delivering a project this large had been underestimated from the beginning. Yet despite all of that, construction never fully stopped. Today, across parts of the Central Valley, massive concrete viaducts, overpasses, and rail structures already stand in the middle of open farmland. Billions of dollars have already been spent. Thousands of workers have already contributed to the build, which creates an entirely new problem. At this point, the project has become too large, too expensive, and too politically symbolic to easily abandon. But finishing it may require tens of billions of dollars the state still doesn't fully have. At this point, the California project stopped being just a rail story. It became something much bigger. Because while California struggled through lawsuits, funding gaps, and political battles, other countries kept building. China constructed the largest high-speed rail network in the world, spanning tens of thousands of miles in little more than a decade. Japan continued expanding the bullet train system it pioneered back in the 1960s. Europe connected major cities through modern rail corridors that millions of passengers now rely on every year. Even countries with far smaller economies than the United States moved ahead with high-speed rail projects, while America continued debating whether it could finish even one. And that raises an uncomfortable question. How did the country that built the interstate highway system, the Hoover Dam, and the Transcontinental Railroad suddenly become a country where infrastructure projects can take decades just to partially complete? Part of the answer comes down to priorities. For decades, the United States has invested heavily in highways, airports, and car-based infrastructure. Rail simply never became a national priority in the same way it did elsewhere. And over time, the systems around infrastructure construction became slower, more fragmented, and more politically divided. Large projects today often require coordination across federal, state, and local governments, along with years of environmental reviews, legal challenges, and shifting political leadership. And when priorities change every election cycle, long-term infrastructure becomes incredibly difficult to execute consistently. But despite all of that, there are still groups trying to prove high-speed rail can work in America. One of the biggest examples is Brightline West, a privately backed high-speed rail project connecting Las Vegas and Southern California. Unlike California high-speed rail, Brightline is using the median of Interstate 15 for much of its route, avoiding many of the land acquisition battles that slowed California down. The company plans to run trains at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour, potentially cutting travel time between Las Vegas and Los Angeles to just over 2 hours. And unlike California's system, construction is already visibly moving forward. But even Brightline comes with questions. The project still depends heavily on public financing and federal support. Critics have questioned whether high-speed rail can become financially sustainable in a country so dependent on cars and air travel. and Brightline's existing Florida operations have already faced scrutiny over safety incidents and financial performance. So even America's most promising rail projects still carry uncertainty, which means the real issue here may not just be whether California finishes its train. It's whether the United States still has the political will, the funding structure, and long-term coordination needed to build projects at this scale anymore. Because if projects like this continue failing, America is risking falling even further behind countries that are already building the infrastructure of the future. At this point, the California high-speed rail project has become more than just a transportation project. It's become a test of whether America can still execute massive infrastructure at all. If California succeeds even partially, it could completely change how Americans think about transportation. It could open the door for future rail systems connecting cities like Dallas and Houston, Atlanta and Charlotte, maybe even the Northeast Corridor in ways we've never seen before. It could reduce congestion, cut emissions, create thousands of long-term projects, and finally give the US something most developed countries already have: true high-speed rail. But if it fails, the consequences are just as big. So California is stuck in a difficult position. Too far in to walk away easily, but still very far from the original vision that voters were promised back in 2008. So, what do you think? Is California high-speed rail an investment that simply needs more time? Or has it become one of the biggest infrastructure failures in modern American history? And more importantly, do you think the United States will ever fully embrace high-speed rail the way the rest of the world already has? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into the infrastructure mega projects and engineering challenges shaping the future, make sure to subscribe for more.